spoken about how Moshe was told to speak to the rock, and he struck the rock. And Hashem says to Moshe, Yom Hashem el Moshe el Aaron yan lo hemantim bi like bisheni, because you did not believe in me to sanctify me before the eyes of Bnei Israel, therefore you will not bring this congregation to the land which I gave you. And then it concludes, Hema Memriva, they are the waters of quarreling, Asher Ov Bnei Israel, as Hashem, Vayekodish Bam. And he became sanctified through them. Hashem became sanctified through them. So Rashi says, Shemesu Moshe v'Aaron al Yodom, as a result of the Memriva, Moshe and Aaron passed away, and they did not go into the land. When Hashem metes out justice to those who are holiest to Him, who yorui umiskadish al brius, He becomes feared and He's sanctified in the eyes of mankind. V'cheinu omer, nor elokim mikdoshecho. God communicates an awesomeness through those who are holiest. V'cheinu omer, and as it says, Bikrovi HaKodesh, I will be, only with those closest to me, I will be sanctified. What is that pasuk referring to? Nadav and Avihu was struck down on the 8th day when they were installed as Kohanim. When the Shekhinah, the divine presence, entered into the Mishkan, they were struck down. And after they were struck down, Moshe said to Aaron, his brother, I knew this was going to happen, but initially I believed it would be either you or me. Because Hashem had said at the day of the inauguration of the Mishkan, or to take on this permanent status, I'll be sanctified through those who are closest to me. And initially I thought it would be you or myself, because we're the closest. But now that I see that Nadav and Avihu were taken, they're closer than we are. That was the conversation between Moshe and Aaron. And then the Torah tells us, Vayidom Aaron. Aaron remained silent. So the way the commentators explain it, that was a consolation. When Aaron realized the value of his children, that they were the holiest, that was the consolation. And therefore he remained silent. But originally Moshe says, I thought, since it says, Bekrovi HaKodesh, with those who are closest to me, I will be sanctified. So I thought those who were closest were either you or myself. But now it was another view, it was they, it was them. So here also, that Hashem is meting out justice to Moshe and Aaron, Vayikodesh Ben Hashem becomes sanctified through taking Moshe and Aaron's life. Why? Because Bikrovi HaKodesh. So over there, Rameir Simcha explains, why would Nadav Avihu, the most eligible candidates, be taken in that context? Because that was their only sin. And because that was their only sin, normally a person says, Hashem looks away and He sweeps it under the carpet. And since it's just one or two failings, just to the contrary, nothing goes unseen, and everything's based on, everything goes into the evaluation in terms of the verdict. So even though that was their only sin, so the whole concept of Daino Emes was demonstrated with the take of Nadav Avihu. As perfect as they were for that sin, they deserved their life should be taken. So that's Hashem says, Bekrovi HaKodesh, I will be sanctified for those who are closest to me. So Moshe and Aaron, Moshe thought initially would be he or Aaron, because they were the greatest, but they had other sins. But they were sinless other than this sin, therefore that sanctification of Hashem's name, that He's the Dain Emes, is demonstrated greater through Nadav Avihu. But over here, when the Torah tells us, Vayikodesh Behem, so they struck the rock. But is that enough reason they should be taken? Moshe is Moshe and Aaron is Aaron. Doesn't make a difference. Bekrovi HaKodesh. Even those who are closest to Him, Hashem is sanctified because He demonstrates Daino Emes, He is the equitable judge, and even when it comes to punishment, there's no such thing as favoritism. He doesn't look away. That's this. So I was thinking that this is what I was thinking. The Gemara tells us in one location, based on a pasuk, that one should not say words which have any negative connotation, because there is a covenant with the lips. It's called bris krusa b'sosayim. There's a covenant which is in place regarding one's lips, that what we articulate with our lips, those words actually have meaning and have consequences. And the Gemara shows examples of this. Moshe Rabbeinu originally says, "B'krovei HaKodesh." I thought it would be us. That means Moshe said, I thought Krovei HaKodesh would apply to us. Now I see it wasn't. But he was convinced it would be him or Aaron initially. The moment he articulated that statement has to manifest itself. Once he said it, it has to manifest itself. So why did Moshe make the mistake? Rather than speaking to the rock, he hit the rock. Of course, he became angry. Due to his anger, he had this blind spot, he struck the rock. But because he said those words, that I or you would be used as the example to demonstrate B'krovei HaKodesh, ultimately that's why this happened. It happened because the dynamic already was set when he said it. Because he said, originally I thought it would be you or I, now it's what? I see it's them, but since he did say it, now ultimately it was carried out, they Kodesh Bem, and they were the examples of B'krovei HaKodesh. That's one thing I said on Shabbos. The other thing I said, which is interesting, we spoke about last week about Al Charbcha Tichya. Remember, we had said that when Moshe wanted to go through the Edomite territory, and he says, we called out to Hashem when we were in Egypt in bondage, and Hashem listened to our voices because we have a blessing from our forefather, Hakol Kol Yaakov, and Hashem listened to our tefillah. So the pasuk says that the king of Stone said, I will go out towards you with our sword. So Rashi cites the Midrash that he says, you're priding yourself, you have a blessing from your forefather, that you're paralyzing your mouth. We have a blessing that our paralyzing the sword. So therefore, we're not in any way fazed or impressed with what you tell us. And they did not pass through their territory. So I asked the question, if you remember, we find the Torah goes out of its way at the end of Chumash Bamidbar, when Bilam was killed, the Torah tells us he was killed with the sword. In the battle of Midian, he was killed with the sword. So Rashi cites the Midrash. Why is it important for us to know how he was killed? He was killed. So Rashi explains that initially Bilam had come to destroy the Jewish people with his mouth through the power of cursing. So he had taken our craft, which our paralyzed in our mouth, to use it against us. So we took his craft, which is a Charbcha Tichya, and we destroyed him. That's what the Torah is telling us. So I asked the question that seemingly a Charbcha Tichya, that's something unique to Edom, that's to Esav. Bilam was not an Edomite. So if Bilam was not an Edomite, what do Chazal tell us? That Bilam's craft was a Charbcha Tichya, and therefore we took his craft, and that's how we killed him, with his craft. That's Edom. This has no relevance to Bilam. So what do we see from there? So what I said was, initially, what was the issue with Esav and Yaakov? Esav was the firstborn. He believed the birthright was his, that he would be the heir to whatever Yitzchak was about. When Yaakov had come and taken the blessings, and he saw that the blessings were effective, and he heard how he purchased it, he understood God wanted that Yaakov should be the one to have the birthright. That's what he wanted. As a result of that, Esav says, and what about me? He says, Al Chabcha Tichya. Esav misunderstood what his father had said to him. Yitzchak understood at that moment that Esav had no relevance to the spiritual realm whatsoever. And what he said to him was, just as all the nations of the world, that classification is Al Chabcha Tichya, your classification is no different than the rest of them. So Esav misunderstood what his father had said to him. He took it as a blessing, but factually speaking, it was a classification. It was a classification. So even when the king of Edom came, and it says we have a blessing, it was the same misunderstanding, but this was passed down from Esav. As Esav believed it was a blessing, he passed it down to all his descendants. We have a blessing. Al-Char B'Tichya. But actually it's not. Because we see Al-Char B'Tichya has relevance to every non-Jew. Their classification of Al-Char B'Tichya. This is what I had said. So this is what I added over Shabbos. Comes to Sinai. Hashem offers the Torah to the nations of the world. And he offers it to the Edomites. And he said, do you want to accept my Torah? So Hashem said, they say to Hashem, what is written in your Torah? Well, he says, it says in 10th commandments, lo tirtzach. Thou shalt not commit murder. He says, we can't accept it. It doesn't conform with our lifestyle. Because we have a blessing from our forefather, Al-Char B'Tichya. So because of that blessing, we can't accept it. It doesn't work. If Esav would have understood that Al-Char B'Tichya is not a blessing, it's purely classification. He said, I want the Torah. I want the Torah. Could you imagine if Esav would have had an interest in the Torah, we'd have a problem. Because our only counterforce to Esav is the Torah itself. But because Esav had this misunderstanding, therefore he rejected the Torah. And so Hashem allowed that Esav should not understand it, to take it as a blessing, and ultimately he turned down the Torah, and therefore the Torah is what? Is the unique and exclusive for the Jews. And that's a Kol Yaakov. Kol Yaakov was a blessing. And it's also a classification. Of course, the power of speech has to do with the spirituality of the human being. The physicality of the human being, that's the one that has no relevance to spirituality. And that's Al-Char B'Tichya. So I said, where do you find something similar? It's when the Torah tells us that Aaron passed away because of the Meriva, and Moshe passed away, will pass away. It says this is the misunderstanding that Paro had, that Paro was an expert astrologer, and he had seen in the stars had said that Moshe Shel Yisrael, that the Redeemer of Israel will be judged by water. His end will come about through water. So he had believed that he would drown him. He has to drown him. But he didn't understand that the Meriva was referring to the striking of the rock due to water. That was Paro's misunderstanding. But listen to what I understood. What happened due to that misunderstanding? He issued a decree that all male Jews, children, should be thrown into the Nile. Now, the Medrash tells us all the children that were thrown into the Nile were the Kotzev Shebekerim. Those children wouldn't have been good children. They would have been the future Rishoim of Klal Yisrael. So Paro weeded out the vineyard by throwing those children. All the children that drowned were children who weren't meant to be contributors to the spirituality of the Jewish people. That's what happened. So due to misunderstanding, misinterpretation of the stars, believing that the Moshe Shel, the water means he will drown. Therefore, since he didn't know who he was, he drowned all the Jewish children. But those Jewish children who were drowned were not the good Jewish children. They wouldn't have been an asset to the Jewish people in the future. 1 second. Now, why did Paro choose water rather than any other means of killing? So Rashi over there cites the Midrash, because Paro understood that the God of the Jews, when he comes and punishes, it's always measure for measure. So he said, if we kill them with the sword, he'll kill us with the sword. We kill them by fire, he'll kill us by fire. But if we drown them, that means God has to bring a deluge, a flood on Mitzrayim. Bringing a flood on Mitzrayim is the equivalent of destroying the world. And God made a covenant with the world that he will never bring a great flood on the world any longer. So we've tied God's hands. So Paro believed he outwitted God. So the Midrash tells us, no, Hashem says, I will not bring a flood on Egypt. But you know something? The Jews, when they borrow the golden vessels, silver vessels from you, you're going to pursue them to get your wealth back, because you're going to realize you were duped. And you're going to pursue them into the Red Sea. So the water is not coming to you, but you're going to the water. So therefore, it's Mida Keneged Mida. Because they drowned the Jewish children, Hashem says, measure for measure you will drown. But not that the flood is coming on Egypt, because Egypt was the height of civilization, but rather the Egyptian armies are going into the Red Sea. So it comes out very interesting. So due to this misunderstanding, a number of things happened. The misinterpretation of the stars. Firstly, he weeded out all the evil by drowning these children. Secondly, now there has to be a punishment of mida connected mida, measure for measure. God promised us when we leave Egypt, we'll leave him with great wealth. So what do? He borrows, he tells us to borrow. But that's going to be the snag. If we borrow, now the Egyptians realize they were duped. Now how do you get them to the Red Sea? By borrowing their personal effects, the gold and silver vessels, believing they were duped, and they were duped, they pursue us. When they pursue us, so the judgment of Hashem, of Mida Keneged Mida, now is going to be instituted due to them coming to the water rather than the water coming on Egypt to destroy Egypt. It's the same idea. Due to the misunderstanding, a number of things happened. As Esav, due to his misunderstanding of Charbat Tichia, he rejected the Torah. It was just a classification, and therefore that was the value. Due to the misinterpretation of the stars, he weeded out the children that wouldn't have been a contribution to the future, but in addition, that caused the Mida Keneged Mida, and therefore he was drowned. So two things happened. We received the wealth, the promise that Hashem had promised Avram. Went out great wealth. In addition, God meted out his justice with measure for measure.